Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I have to start with a confession. I stand in front of you as a complete fraud. I'm not a professor. Nor am I a doctor or a scientist or a clinician of any kind. I've never made a drug. I've never prescribed a drug. I never will. In a MR context, I'm not a surgeon, and the thought of me being allowed to stick a knife in anybody should be enough to make all of you run a mile. What I am is a patient advocate. So what I want to try and do in the next few minutes is to think about personalised medicine, or precision medicine, or stratified medicine, or targeted medicine, or whatever the nom du jour we have for this area of innovation and activity aimed at addressing the unmet health needs of patients and families. What it means and what it looks like from the sharp end, from the perspective of the ultimate end user, of the patient and of the family. Now, we've heard a lot of the rhetoric around personalised medicine, precision medicine, often qualified by previous speakers in terms of how it's applied and the whole hype that is associated with this area of activity. But the rhetoric's unarguable. We talk about the right medicine in the right dose given to the right patient at the right time to maximize the health gain. So what's not to like? I mean, who wouldn't want that? We'd all opt for that given a choice. It brings the best healthcare bang for buck that we want. It makes the best use of resources. It delivers health gain. It does it all at the lowest level of risk. It's a win-win-win situation. It's a win for the patient. It's a win for the doctor. It's a win for industry. It's a win for the health service. But if only things were that simple. And there always is a but in this area, isn't it? Unfortunately, we, as patients, have this contrary tendency to be unbelievably more complicated than the simple model would hold out. We don't take a delight in being difficult to treat. In fact, we'd really rather we were quite simple organisms that you could give a pill to once that would work every time and take our problem away. But unfortunately, it ain't like that. The early examples of personalised medicine, we heard the Gleevec story before the coffee break, were actually quite spectacular. They were quite black and white. I mean, if you think about breast cancer and the HER2 receptor and Herceptin, I mean, cancer drugs are nasty things. They're toxic. They're horrible. If they're not going to do you any good, you certainly don't want to take them. And if they are going to do you some good, then you probably do want to take them. But, more of that later. And when Herceptin first came out, there was this huge outcry. Everybody with breast cancer should get Herceptin. But there was a nuanced debate that took place. And people understood that actually, there is this thing about it working for some people and working on some people for good scientific biological reasons, and not working for other people with what is apparently the same disease for equally good biological and scientific reasons. And these low-hanging fruit, the Gleevecs, the Herceptins, led to this huge excitement, this huge upburst of expectation. It's kind of Dickensian great expectations, particularly as they started to happen at the time when the traditional blockbuster approach to developing drugs was kind of running out of steam. Big Pharma had picked all the low-hanging fruit in terms of small molecules and big populations. So they were desperately trying to find ways of refilling their pipelines, of recalculating their profitability and continuing to produce returns on investments to satisfy their stakeholders. So basically, Big Pharma bet the farm on precision medicine. This was the future. This was the way forward. We were going to be able to produce targeted therapies that delivered big benefits to tightly defined subsets of patients, which would allow for the high costs of drug development to be justified because they delivered big benefits and small risks. Therefore, it would maintain the profitability of the industry, it would deliver health gain, it would reward stakeholders, and everyone would be happy, not least of all the shareholders. But unfortunately, this turned out to be an imperfect hypothesis for many of the reasons that were identified before the coffee break. There are very few binary reactions. You know, the Herceptins of this world, the black and white, where you want it or you don't want it, it works or it doesn't work, are kind of 3 standard deviations from the norm in terms of the way we work. There are many, many, many more shades of grey in terms of how we personalise and target treatment, not all of which, as we heard from the previous speaker, are to do with our biology. But our biology does get in the way of it. You know, our biology tends to make life more difficult for people like you because it's not straightforward. If you take Alzheimer's disease, for example, you know, now Alzheimer's disease is something which many of us would go quite a long way to avoid developing. There's very little you can do about it at the moment in terms of pharmaceutical interventions that will delay the onset of the condition. And we know that if you're homozygous for the ApoE4 gene, then you have a significantly increased risk of developing Alzheimer's as compared with the general population over 70. Now, there is a drug that helps defer the symptoms of Alzheimer's called Aricept. Unfortunately, it works least well in people who are homozygous for the E4 mutation. Works pretty well with people with other mutations in that gene, but if you're homozygous for E4, you're at highest risk and least likely to benefit. Now, from a health economic point of view, from a clinical effectiveness point of view, you might turn around and say, well, there's no point in giving it to you then, really, is there? I mean, it's not going to do you much good. It's not very effective. It's quite expensive. We could spend that money in the National Health Service on something else that would do somebody else more good, greater quantity of good, and it's only sort of deferring the inevitable anyway. But if you're a patient facing the onset of Alzheimer's, you know, you're going to have to be incredibly altruistic to say, yeah, that's all right. You know, I will forego the possibility of a slight improvement in the certainty of, the 100% certainty of this disease will get worse and I will lose my independence, lose my autonomy, lose my sense of self, just because it's not a very good drug. You know, you're much more likely to say, well, I'd rather have all that I can rather than 100% of nothing and let somebody else benefit, unless there are overriding circumstances that make you want to forego that opportunity. Money gets in the way as well. You know, unfortunately, there is no tooth fairy. The Department of Health SOFA does not have unlimited funds stuffed down the back of it to solve the problems of limited availability. And the cost of developing drugs seems to go on getting higher and higher. And the standards that need to be reached in order to demonstrate quality, safety, and efficiency to the regulators, to the Medicines Agency, to the MHRA, and so on, seem to get tougher and tougher until recently. It's the regulatory agencies who determine the hoops through which the pharmaceutical companies have to jump and how big and how high these are set. But our biology You know, traditionally, you've worked on the basis of the gold standard of the large, randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled, multi-center trial. And that worked when you thought that diseases were one entity, when there was breast cancer, or there was bowel cancer, when there was asthma, or diabetes, or schizophrenia, or whatever. But as we know more about our biology, all these common diseases are fragmenting into genetically distinct subsets of what looks phenotypically the same on the surface. And so therefore that traditional gold standard is no longer appropriate in many cases, because it takes more people to prove, using the traditional routes, the quality, safety and efficacy of a therapy than there are families affected by the disease. John mentioned rare diseases in his talk. There are something like 8,000 rare diseases today. There'll be more tomorrow and more the day after as we get better at identifying these distinct entities. And rare diseases have to some extent provided a new way of thinking about drug development, because if you've got a condition where, you know, the name of the syndrome has got more Middle European doctors in it than there are families affected by it, you can't do a multi-center randomized clinical trial. You have to go a different way to prove quality, safety, and efficacy. But even within the field of rare diseases, you're getting fragmentation. You know, we heard about cystic fibrosis and ivacaftor or Kalydeco or Kalydeco or whichever, and the G551D mutation. Now, yep, that's a problem when it comes to paying for an expensive drug for a very small population. And we haven't got time to talk about the sort of the ethics of drug pricing and the practices of drug pricing. But if you've got the G551D mutation in the CFTR gene, then ivacaftor is a life-changing intervention. You know, it really does alter the quality and the quantity of your life substantially. The problem is, for the 96% of patients with cystic fibrosis who don't have that particular mutation, how are we going to be able to incentivize the academic community, the industry, the clinical community to structure the trials and the interventions that will enable other subsets, and eventually perhaps all patients with cystic fibrosis, to be able to benefit from interventions that are at least as effective as ivacaftor. And we need to make sure that the regulatory framework that determines whether or not you can put a drug on the market is fit for purpose. And I think we need to find a way of making sure that the regulation follows our biology. You know, that's much more sensible and straightforward thing to do than trying to get our biology to obey the regulations, which sometimes seems to be the way in which the regulatory authorities would like it to happen. And this is going to be increasingly important as innovation in therapeutics moves from the situation where you have a small molecule targeted at a huge population to increasingly large molecules, genes, possibly even going up to stem cells and other and tissues being targeted at smaller and smaller populations. And that the vulnerability of families to hype. You know, if you Google stem cell treatments, you will find that stem cells will cure everything. Even things that you didn't know you had, you will be cured of. At the Kim Il-sung Pyongyang stem cell clinic in North Korea or somewhere. So we need to find a way of getting proportionate regulation, appropriate regulation, that allows patients to have confidence that the interventions they're being offered are appropriately regulated and fit for purpose. But it's not just our biology gets in the way. You know, sadly, we do too as patients. We get in the way of this nice inexorable progression of personalised medicine, from bright idea to closely targeted therapy. Because very few medicines provide a cure, a perfect, a one-off hit that hits the problem, hits it hard, kills it dead, takes it away, and it never comes back. If it did that, we'd all want it. It's a bit like having your appendix out. You've got a choice. If your appendix goes bad, you can allow the surgeon to take it out and be better, or you can refuse the surgeon consent and you die. If medicines were all binary decisions like that, it would be easy, but unfortunately, they're not. Most are imperfect solutions. They address particular aspects of a condition. They have side effects associated with them. Now, the thing is that diseases are heterogeneous, and so are patients. We know which aspects of a particular condition that affect us really screw up our lives. There are other things that we can live with. They're a nuisance, and it would be nice if they weren't there, but give us a choice. Say I can address my research at those things which really make a difference to your life, or I can address my research to those things which which are interesting but may not be the thing that bothers you most. And it's important that the research, the efforts, the energy, the innovation is addressed at those things that matter to patients. That's important at a humanitarian level. It's also important in terms of the likelihood of getting a new therapy through marketing authorization and HTA processes, because if you can demonstrate that what you're doing is addressing an issue that's important to those people who will take the medicine at the end of it, then A, you're likely to improve your clinical trial recruitment. B, your clinical trial is likely to be designed in a way that will yield results that are appropriate. C, it will convince the regulators when it comes to looking at the benefit-risk calculation. And D, the HTA and the reimbursement agencies will be more likely to make that intervention available for routine commissioning because they can see that it's addressing an important health need. Give you an example. Duchenne muscular dystrophy, a wasting disease that affects boys and often kills them in their late teens, early 20s. There's a drug recently been licensed called ataluren. That defers the time at which boys with Duchenne need to go into a wheelchair. And that's an important thing. But when you ask the boys themselves, it's a sex-linked gene, that's why I'm referring to boys. When you ask the boys themselves what's important to them, going off their feet into a wheelchair, it's a big change, but it's not as disastrous as you might think, because very often they find that when they stop trying to walk, they have greater mobility because the wheelchair makes it easier for them to get about. What they really value is their hand function, because the better, the longer, the stronger their hand function continues, the more they can interact with the world outside through their devices, through their smartphones, their iPads, they can engage more. So preserving hand function is more important to many boys with Duchenne muscular dystrophy than avoiding going into a wheelchair. But one of the measures, the endpoints for the trial, was the 6-minute walk test. It might have been easier to get ataluren into boys with Duchenne muscular dystrophy in the NHS if the trial had focused on some of the things that mattered to the boys who were going to take it at a higher level of concentration than some of those endpoints that could be measured and counted. And of course there are difficulties in getting patient-reported outcome measures reported robustly and consistently. But just because it's difficult doesn't mean that we shouldn't try and do it. Parkinson's. There was an experimental clinical trial a few years ago in the States, which had to be, it was stopped because it used fetal stem cell injections into the brainstem of Parkinson's patients. And in some Parkinson's patients, they found that the uncontrolled muscle tremors of those patients got worse, so they stopped the trial. But one of the patients on that trial was quoted as saying, yes, my tremors got worse, but I could talk to my grandchildren for the first time in 10 years, and I know which I valued most. And given a choice, I would have liked to have continued. So, patients have a say, and should have a say, about the benefits and risks and the relative value of both. We did a citizens' jury about benefit and risk in innovative medicine licensing. And one of our jurors, all our jurors had life-limiting diseases. One of our jurors wrote in the diary that we asked them to keep for this project, he said, imagine having a rare disease that nobody understands, with no treatment, is a bit like being in an airplane. You're flying along, and the cabin attendant comes along and says, excuse me, sir, here's a parachute. There's a 90% chance that this parachute will fail to open. Would you like to jump out? And you go, what? Are you crazy? And you go, but by the way, both wings have just fallen off the plane, and there is 100% certainty that you're going to die. Now, in that situation, you tell a regulator there's a 90% chance of failure, they won't let you get anywhere near a patient. But for the patient, that 10% chance of success might be the one that they're prepared to take. And of course, we volunteer. We don't have to do it. We can say no. So what we want to see in terms of looking at the notion of risk in developing personalised medicines is understanding not just of what the risk might be, but what the benefit might be. Measuring that benefit in terms that matter to us, not just in terms of those things which can be counted. Another example, a friend of mine has a degenerative neuromuscular condition for which there is an enzyme replacement therapy. It's an expensive drug, but she has been taking that therapy for a few years now, and over that time it has produced a 4% increase in her lung volume. Now, for most people, a 4% increase in lung volume is neither here nor there. You wouldn't notice it. But for her, that 4% means that she doesn't have to spend most of the day on artificial respiration. So, she's free of the respirator. She doesn't have a mask in front of her face, so you can see her face. She can smile at you. She can have a conversation. She's not afraid to, move to a place where she doesn't know where the nearest power outlet is in case her battery goes down. That 4% measurable change has dramatically changed the quality of her life and her opportunity and her expectation. And it has also dramatically changed the quality of life of her family, who now see her in a totally different way. So if you do leave out the input from patients and from families when it comes to looking at the calculation of benefit and risk in developing targeted therapies, then you're at great danger of ending up with a system that knows the cost of everything and the value of nothing. Now you might say, well, patients, they're unrealistic. If they'll fall for anything. Not a bit of it. Yes, of course, some of us are gullible, some of us are naive, some of us are desperate, some of us will do stupid things in the hope of, some sort of future gain or benefit. In that, we're no different from anybody else in this room or even on the planet. We can all do stupid things at times. We can all make bad judgments. But, just because we're patients doesn't mean that we are necessarily more gullible, stupid, or vulnerable than anyone else. We know that healthcare resources are not unlimited. We know that science has not yet delivered the panacea to all ills. But what we also know is that we have a view on these things. we don't expect, well, we'd love to expect miracle cures, but we know it's unlikely. And given we are where we are, what we want is a voice in a system that says, when it comes to valuing innovation, when it comes to targeting therapies that meet our needs, we want to know that the system is transparent. We want to know how it works, that it's robust, that we can put our perspective into the decisions that are made, that this perspective will be listened to, and that if the decision at the end of the day is, no, we're going to stop that research program, or we're not going to grant that marketing authorization, or we're not going to recommend this for commissioning for routine prescribing, that the system has been operated in a fair and a rational way, and that we have been heard. Don't expect us to like it. I mean, God, we're not saints. You know, if there's something we want and you say, well, I'm sorry you can't have it, then we're going to be mad as hell. But at least we will feel that we've had a chance and a fair crack of the whip. At least we will feel that our voice has been heard, that our views and our expectations have been listened to. And at least we will feel that if something else does come along, we can have another go round the track, and maybe this time the outcome will be different, and we will be able to benefit from something that addresses our needs in a way we value, in a time and a manner that we can use, so that those figures about compliance or lack of compliance swing the other way, and you can actually maximize the health gain that we can expect from the entrepreneurialness, the innovation, the ingenuity, the sheer intellectual brain power that is gathered in this room, determined to address those problems. Thank you very much.